Okay.
Good afternoon. Welcome everyone who's logging in. I'm gonna give you a few more moments and then we'll kick off and get started. We've got, last I checked, we had 250 people registered for this webinar. I wonder if that number has jumped in the last hour or so. Let me look. Well, we're waiting for a few more folks to log in. All right. Yeah, we're up to 260 registrations. That's very exciting.
It is.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get us kicked off. So welcome everyone to the Oregon Realtors webinar, What's Hot and What's Not with E&O Claims. We're joined today by Lisa Scoble and Chad Winselsprat from Pearl Insurance. And they're going to be telling us what's hot and what's not in E&O claims. So very excited to pass it over to them and their knowledge. Just a few reminders for folks in the audience. If you are watching in a group setting and you are not individually logged in with your name, you will not receive CE. We can only provide CE if we know and have record of your presence. The only way we have record of your presence in this class is if you are logged in with your name. So please be sure that when you registered, you included your name and your member number or license number. If you are not sure if your name is correct, feel free to chat at Oregon Realtors in the chat and we can confirm that for you. You do need to remain on for this webinar is a 2-hour webinar. So you'll need to remain on for 100 minutes in order to be eligible for CE. And we will be emailing out instructions on how to access your CE certificate and your member profile through Oregon Realtors within 2 weeks of the webinar. We will also be sending out slides at the end of this presentation so you have access to the slide deck as well. And we will be recording, but the recording will be for purchase for anyone who was not able to make it. We don't share the recording out with the attendees just to ensure that we're able to control CE and make sure that folks who are watching know if or not they're getting CE. All right. So with that, I'm so excited to hand it over to Lisa and Chad. Thank you, Lisa and Chad.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Martha. And we have Katie in the background helping us out here too. So that's great. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully this works out. Share. All right. How's that look? Chad, is it?
It looks great. We can, if you hit
Oh,
present, then we'll see just the slides, but it looks great.
Yeah.
I can't. Okay, I will do that. Okay, better? Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, I'm being. All right, can you see just one slide?
not sure what I'm looking at right now.
We're
Oh.
seeing your share screen. You might try stopping share in Zoom and then go back and hit share again and see if you can find a better option for that.
Okay.
In the meantime, in the chat, let us know what part of the state you're coming from. We'd love to hear where we've got representation from. Okay, so now we're seeing your presenter screen.
Okay.
So we're seeing like the slide notes and maybe if you hit,
Which one?
we're getting folks from all over the state.
If you swap presenter and presentation view from display settings.
Okay, swap presenter. Now is it okay? One slide?
No,
Yeah.
no, it's still showing your presenter mode. Go ahead and stop share one more time.
All right.
And tell me what you see regarding your slides when you're doing that presenter share and we'll get it all sorted. This is my fault. I should have double checked this before we got started. So we've got folks from Cannon Beach, Bend, all over.
Okay, now I have.
Perfect. Yep.
Perfect. There it is.
Okay. All right, I assure everyone on this call that I am not an IT person, as you know. In fact, I think I had this issue when I did an in-person at one of your annual events, but the content's going to be a lot better than my skills here. So I assure you. Thank you. Thanks for your help, Erica and Katie. So let's go back here. Again, my name's Lisa Scoble. I've been with Pearl 29 years. I work with the association and all of our association partners. I have a certified insurance counselor and a certified risk manager designation. And I also have my real estate license in Michigan. That's where I'm located. And I've had that for 29 years. I don't really use it, but I got it so that I could understand a lot of the ins and outs of the real estate industry when I first started this job. And this is all I do. It's all, I live and breathe real estate, E&O claims, and that's my qualification to bring you this information. Chad, why don't you go ahead and share your background?
Yeah, my name's Chad Wenzel Spratt. I have been in the insurance industry for over 20 years, been at Pearl for the last 13 years. I've obtained the same designations as Lisa. She's been my mentor for many years, and I've learned a lot from her, and looking forward to sharing some good knowledge with you all today.
And I want to let everyone know, since this is a 2-hour CE course, what we typically do is we just go through the whole thing. We know that you get 10-minute breaks every hour, but if we were to poll all 260 of you, I think 259 would say, let's just get this thing over with and go through it, and then take our 20 minutes that we have at the end. So we're just going to go right through. We will try to break it up. It's in sections. After each section, we'll open it up for questions. And I think that breaks it up a little bit more, you know, wakes all of us up. If there are no questions, we'll just keep going. But if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and Katie will help us with answering those or unmuting the people who have their hands raised when we get to those questions sections. Okay, let's move on. Right here, we're looking at our disclaimer. Of course, we start with a disclaimer, much like a lot of the information that you work with. It almost feels like an MLS listing, in that what we're saying is we're presenting information that we've deemed from reliable sources. We cite our sources, and we get our information from our claims department, which is the AXA XL Insurance Company Claims Department, as well as from NAR. And it's as up to date as, you know, possible. But we are, again, citing our sources. We're not just picking these numbers out of the air. And it is intended to be a general guide on the subject matter. Chad and I both are very, very, I think, knowledgeable when it comes to the E&O information, and we'll be able to hopefully answer questions for you on that. But if you have specific questions about your policy and you're not with an AXA XL policy, we strongly recommend that you talk to your insurance broker, because no two policies are alike. So let's go on and give you an overview of what we'll be looking at today. We're going to talk a little bit about E&O coverage. We don't want to talk policy the whole time, because that wouldn't be much fun. But we'll talk about E&O, just an overview of what coverage is, what's covered and what's not covered. I think it's just as important to talk about exclusions as coverage is. You don't want to find out you don't have something covered at the time that you have a claim. We'll look at a claims overview, and then our Oregon claims review. We have some statistics as well as where we're seeing claims come from in your state. Also emerging issues with a couple of case studies. Cyber liability continues to be an issue, and as it relates to insurance coverage, we'll go through that. There's a new issue in town when it comes to our claims department, and that's fraud and forgery with regard to absentee sellers and website ADA compliance. I know a couple of years ago, the association had sent some information out about that because it was popping up in other states and kind of making its way across the country. We thought it was cooling down, and then we saw it pop up in additional states. So we're still talking about it. And finally, we'll end with our risk management tips, which are are, we call them pearls of wisdom. And they're things that you can do to minimize your exposure or mitigate damages if you do have a claim. Very easy things to do, risk management tips. So let's jump in here. What is E&O insurance? Errors and omissions insurance is, you can consider it your malpractice insurance. That's, I think, the easiest way to think about it, because we all know malpractice insurance, but it is your professional liability insurance. And it covers you for things that you do in the course of your real estate professional services for others. And I say real estate because an E&O policy is written to cover real estate services, but it's not written to cover something that an accountant's liability or a lawyer's liability policy would be. So if you're giving legal advice and you have a claim based on that, or you're giving tax advice and you have a claim based on that, that's not what a real estate E&O policy is there for. It's there to cover you for professional services such as assisting a seller as a listing agent, a buyer's agent, appraisals, property management services, lease services, residential and commercial sales and leasing, things of that nature. Those are professional, real estate professional services. Again, it's very important that you know what your particular policy is covering you for too. When we talk about real estate professional services, since all policies are different, let's say you're in a firm and you're doing some property management. Do you know that your E&O policy covers property management services? Our policy is a real broad form definition of professional services, but I encourage everyone to make sure that they know what services are covered under their policy. The intent of E&O is to cover third-party transactions. The intent has not been to cover self-dealing. So I'm listing and selling, I'm buying houses and flipping them. That's not the intent of E&O. It's something we'll get into a little bit later, but the intent originally is third-party services. These are just a couple of the policy coverages that are pretty typical, but again, you want to check with your policy to see what you have and at what limits, because they may provide certain coverages, they may not provide them, or they may have sublimits attached to them. The first one, personal injury, I include because we don't see a lot of these claims, but they can pay a lot of money because it can take a lot of time to get rid of them, a lot of discovery. Their personal injury is libel, slander, wrongful entry, invasion of privacy, wrongful eviction. It's not slip and fall. That we consider bodily injury. I know TV commercials, the lawyers call it personal injury, but for your E&O, personal injury is libel, slander, wrongful entry, all of those. Those are when you look at claims, most of our claims fall into a couple of buckets, and it's the same thing over and over and over again. And then you get some that are a little bit different, but personal injury are interesting. Those are what I call the sexy claims, because they can be, one agent said something about the agent on the other side of the deal and apparently harmed that agent so that they can't do business anymore or can't function. Or you've harmed a group of appraisers or home inspectors by saying that group, they're deal killers, and you've harmed their business. Those are personal injury claims. But we also see in property management services, wrongful entry, and that can be even non-property management, but wrongful eviction, that's a personal injury claim. And the wrongful entry claims that we see, regardless of whether it's property management or simply in a home, those are interesting. Those can be really dicey and interesting as well. We've had a few times where I recall the wrong home being toured because either the house number was, it had a north and south on that street. So it had 123 north, 123 south, and the office went to the wrong, they went to north when it was supposed to be south. And the homeowner actually let them in, elderly homeowner, let them in, that's wrongful entry. If that homeowner can find a way that you have harmed them, they can sue you. Environmental failure to advise, and now including mold. Every policy that I look at has an exclusion for pollution, but then they go on pretty much typically to say, okay, we exclude any claim that arises from any kind of pollution, but we will, if there is a claim that says you failed as my real estate professional, you failed to advise me of this exposure, then there would be coverage. Our policy covers residential and commercial, and we also have a mold coverage included, which is really nice. For a while, carriers were really pulling back on mold, was kind of fear of the unknown, I think. But now it seems like they're readily providing mold coverage as well. Again, look at your policy to see if you have both residential, commercial, what kind of limits do you have, and mold. And then in addition to that, look at your policy to see what the definition of a pollutant is in your policy. Does it include radon? Some don't. Does it include mold? Some don't. Know what your policy covers. Fair housing discrimination. This is another one that I think we see more often in property management, but we do see it outside of property management. We don't see it as often as a general misrepresentation claim, but they do take a little bit longer and they tend to pay more, even if you did not, you're found to not have violated fair housing laws. So that's one that you want to know, is your policy covering it? And are they covering it for defense and damages, or just defense? And what limits? These policies are not written to cover bodily injury, the slip and fall, the dog bite, or property damage. The property damage would be on a homeowner's policy or on the firm's general liability policy. However, over the past years, carriers have put a little bit of property damage coverage in these E&O policies. This particular policy has some property damage coverage. If you're using a lockbox, someone gets into the home via the lockbox and they steal something, they vandalize, and you have a lawsuit. It also gives you some property damage coverage. If you're holding an open house and there results in some damage, some theft, some damage, and the homeowner comes after you. Now, these are for claims. If there is vandalism, and let's say the homeowner turns it into their insurance company, that's not an E&O claim. They're turning it into their insurance company, but the insurance company can also subrogate and come after you then and say, well, it's because you weren't properly holding this open house and watching people. And in that case, then it becomes an E&O claim. Open house property damage had an interesting claim where a home was being shown and it had beautiful hardwood floors, very large home, couple of floors, and a woman came through and she had those spiky heels on, and one of the heels at the bottom of the heel, the tip was off. And what's that rubber tip? What's under there? All the women on the call know it's like a little screw. And so this woman's walking through the house, unknowingly scratched the wood floor up throughout this house. Now the homeowners could have turned it into their E&O, but they didn't. They came after the agent who was our insured holding that open house. And that was an E&O claim for the damages throughout this entire house to repair the floors. That's an open house property damage claim. And finally, I bring up coverage for agent-owned property transactions. Above, I mentioned that the intent is not to cover agent-owned property, it's third-party transactions. But over the years, again, E&O has added a little bit of coverage. Generally, their policy will say, any policy, they exclude coverage if you have any ownership in a property and you're listing or selling it. Then they go on to say, but under these circumstances, we'll provide coverage. That's how our policy is. And we call them coverage give backs. And we have a few of those. The most common one is if I'm an agent in your office and I want to list and sell my residential property, 1 to 4 family dwelling. I want to list and sell it through the firm. And I want there to be coverage. And of course, the broker wants there to be coverage on that transaction. Then I have to recommend a home inspection. It doesn't have to be done with us, but if it's not done, I need to have something in writing, some kind of a waiver. I need to use standard contracts, and I need to provide a seller's disclosure form and get that acknowledged prior to closing. Some policies require you to have that home inspection. Some of them go so far as to say it has to be done by an accredited home inspection company, or excuse me, a home inspector like ASHI or CREA, and then they may go so far as to say you have to have a home warranty on that property. So know what your policy says with regard to agent-owned property transactions before you have a claim, before your agents or you as an agent are listing and selling your own property. Because you don't want to find out that there were things that you needed to do for coverage to be afforded if something goes south on that transaction. And you could have done that prior, right? By the time you get to the claim, you can't get that home inspection done if you have to do that, or put the home warranty on. It's going to be too late. So know how that is handled. Our policy also covers if I own a property as an agent and I'm managing, I own 100% of the property and it's residential and I'm managing it, I'm covered, or that property management services are covered. They also say, and I know not a lot of people are doing this, but guaranteed sale listings. If you're holding the property out for sale for 12 months from the time that you purchase it or acquire it, then those transactions as agent-owned property transactions are covered. Best case scenario is to have someone else in the firm with no ownership interest handle the transaction when it comes to agent-owned property. Some policies require you to do that. I know some of our broker owners require their agents to do that because they've been in those situations and they know that agent-owned property transactions are potentially volatile and they're more difficult to defend. That's why carriers did not include coverage years ago for this. And then I think to be competitive, they very reluctantly started adding this coverage. And as we go to the next slide, which is our exclusions, I still have the agent-owned property transactions on here because it is an exclusion, again, with those give backs. And why is that? Because our agent-owned property transaction claims that we handle pay 5 times more than our third-party claims. So if you're just, it's a misrepresentation condition of property, the buyer's coming after you, whatever the average is paid there, if it was an agent-owned property, typically it's going to pay a lot more in defense and damages. That's why these, again, that's the proof that they are potentially volatile transactions. Also, if you're an agent and you construct or develop properties, that kind of falls into that bucket of agent-owned property. There are endorsements on many E&O policies that will pick up coverage at a cost, at an additional premium for those types of transactions. Bodily injury, I mentioned before, that's typically not covered. You may be able to get a little bit of bodily injury covered. We have some for lockbox and open house that is added in, but typically bodily injury is not an E&O exposure. That's something that would go to a general liability policy or a homeowner's policy. Property damage, same thing, except for open house and lockbox. Commission disputes, they expect that you take those over to the board to remediate. And then intentional acts, fraud will never be covered by E&O. Intentional or criminal acts are not covered. Chad, do you have anything you want to add with these either coverages or exclusions?
No, I think you covered it very well.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chad, take it away.
All right. I get a lot of people ask me, where do the majority of claims come from? Well, more than 70% of the claims that we see are from misrepresentation or failing to disclose. Now, misrepresentation, we're all human, we make mistakes. And so some examples, you've told a young couple that their home that they're purchasing is going to be in this particular school district that they're hoping to send their kids to. And they purchase the property, find out later that they had redistricted, and the home that they're in is no longer going to be in the school district they were hoping for. So it's important to, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, make sure you have all the facts in order before you represent a property. However, the even greater portion of this 72% is from failing to disclose related to the condition of a property. And that's not necessarily going to fall on you. That's going to fall on the seller when they fill out the seller's disclosure form and provide as much detailed information as they possibly can. Next slide. So there are four areas that require you to take action. And a lot of people think claims are simply a nasty letter that they get in the mail, but that just isn't so. The basic definition of a claim is a demand for money or services. We say that again, it's a demand for money or services. So if you're having a verbal conversation, you've received a voicemail, an email, a text message from your client demanding money or services from you, you must report that to your boss, to your manager, to the owner, whoever you report things to. You need to let them know right away that you have a claim. Now, an incident, if we go back to what I was saying before about the couple purchasing a home in the wrong school district, you just learn that that misinformation. And so the client doesn't know that yet. So they're not demanding any money or service, but you have an incident. You're aware that this could become a claim. So you need to report that to your boss. Say, hey, I sold this couple a house. Turns out the house isn't in the school district that I told them it was in. We got to fix this. These are things that your boss needs to report to us so that we can help resolve the matter. Now, depositions, part of the policy has coverage to provide legal representation if you are being deposed. And more times than not, you're not even on the, being sued. You're the one on the other side of the transaction where the opposing counsel needs your information to help make their case. So you've been subpoenaed, and we do not want anyone going to a deposition without having spoken to an attorney or have an attorney represent them at the deposition. We don't want you to have to say something that's going to ultimately get you pulled into the claim, and then now your insurance company's on the hook to pick up the tab. Same thing with disciplinary action. If the state or local board, somebody files a complaint against you, again, we're going to provide you with legal assistance to help resolve that matter. And just both when it comes to depositions and disciplinary action, no deductible applies for these two. So definitely report this. Once you get a subpoena in the mail, you get that letter saying that somebody has got a complaint against you. Get it to your manager so that they can get in touch with us and we can help resolve the matter.
Well, went a little too far. Okay.
That's right. This slide is very helpful because there are some do's and don'ts when you experience a claim. And so what we definitely want you to do is accept any and all legal paperwork without issue and report the matter, as I've said many times, to your manager immediately. And definitely provide, here I've got our carrier XXL, but definitely report it to your provider, your carrier. Complete the claim form, tell your side of the story, include all of the legal paperwork, demand notices. We need the complete file. What we don't want you to do is to admit any liability or blame. Be quiet about the matter. Do not attend any conferences or participate in any depositions regarding any of the allegations. Again, we're trying to minimize your exposure, your liability, and absolutely do not make any voluntary payments. I mean, you may have a client that comes back to you that you just sold a house to, and they've got a minor issue that you could probably pay $200 to $500 out of pocket for, just to, maintain your reputation as in providing good service for your customers. However, by doing that, maybe 6 months down the road, that particular issue, is not resolved, and it actually escalates into something that now could cost $20,000 to $25,000. And if you turn it in, and you've actually provided voluntary payment up front, could affect whether or not the coverage is going to be applicable.
Okay, that's the end of the section on E&O. So we're going to take some questions that we have in the chat. This one is from Cassie. She says, I'm very curious about the insurance side. I pay E&O to my brokerage as a realtor and my team's LLC, but curious if I need personal liability insurance for myself personally as a realtor outside of that. Chad, you want to take that?
I'm not seeing that.
Well, it's in the chat. I'm going to read them. You don't
Okay.
see them.
I didn't see them.
Yeah.
I've seen some, but I didn't see that one.
Okay. So the answer is you should be covered by your broker's policy. If your broker has a policy, there are some companies that will write individual agents, and a whole firm will have a bunch of individual agents, but like our policy, we would write it for the broker owner, and all of the agents in the office are covered. So you're covered under your broker's policy.
Yeah, I had actually answered that one now that I see it, I actually responded to that in the chat, explaining
Okay.
that they're covered under their broker's policy for the services they're doing for them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and that's something that I should have mentioned up under the E&O, that let's say you're working for a broker, but you have an appraisal company on the side and you're doing some appraisals, which fit the definition of professional services, but you're not doing them on behalf of your broker. You're not running the fees through your brokerage. That would not be covered by your broker's E&O. In that case, you would want to get your own E&O for the appraisals that you're doing that aren't being run through your broker's your brokerage. Do we get CE credits if you can't see us? Yeah, you get CE credits.
Yeah, I answered the next question too. If they ask if they could be sued for making a referral to another realtor who gets into a transaction problem, and the simple answer I provided was you can be sued by anyone at any time for anything.
Yeah, we'll answer these too, Chad. You don't have to answer them during the thing. We'll answer them when we at the end, like we had talked about.
Okay.
That way everybody gets the benefit of the question and the answer, I think. Or go ahead and answer them and we'll just redo it. What if non-RMLS selling own house, whether listing or buyer, if one already has a buyer, owner finance deal, still need E&O? That's from Kathy. I guess I'm not totally following that. I believe you need E&O for all transactions, especially if there's some agent ownership involved. It's whether or not you have your E&O policy is going to cover it. If it's a for sale by owner, if it's not run through your brokerage, no, it's not going to be covered. I don't know why. Yeah, we don't normally see that. If listing or buyer, if one already has a buyer, I guess if you want to, Kathy, raise your hand and maybe elaborate on that question if I'm not understanding it correctly. And somebody said the closed captioning is not coming through for Chad. If you want the closed captioning, we'll have to figure it out. I just hit some button that it's coming through for me. And of course, as you could see in the beginning of the presentation, I am IT presentation challenged. And so somehow I have closed captioning. Okay, Kathy, there you go. Katie, can you unmute Kathy so we can take her question?
Yeah, yes, I think I'm unmuted now.
Okay, great.
Yes. It's a situation where somebody is a realtor and they already have a buyer and they're not going to put it in multiple listing service. They want to do the owner financing to avoid the high capital gain tax on the high priced properties right now. And the realtor does not have air and emissions insurance at all at this point. And so what she's wondering if she should go ahead and get errors and emissions insurance, or, you know, whether you suggest that. And second, she looked into the policy some years ago, and you have to keep the policy 5 years after you get out of being a realtor. Can you recommend companies that won't require you paying real estate air and emission 5 years after you get out of the business? 'Cause that,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah, that I'm not sure who she talked to, but that brings up a really good question. First of all, should she go out and get E&O just for that one transaction? You're not going to be able to get E&O just for that one transaction. I don't believe that would be possible. Because, well, it might be difficult. I shouldn't say you're not going to be able to get it, but to say, oh, I want to go get it now because I have this transaction, that there's some ownership. If that's the only transaction that she's just looking to cover, that one transaction, that's not really the way they write the policy forms, and Chad can elaborate on that. But I also wanted to mention all of these policies are written on what's called a claims made form, which is so different than we're used to with our personal lines coverage, with our home and our auto. With those, they're written on what's called an occurrence form. And I can switch from AAA to Citizens. I can have an accident under AAA and then get sued 3 years later. I can go back to AAA. That's not how E&O works. E&O is written on what they call a claims made form. The carrier who insures you at the time the claim is made is the one who handles it. And Chad, as he said, a claim is a demand for money or services. So you could have a transaction that had an issue on it today, and you're insured with ABC company, but you don't know that there's an issue on it, and you change your insurance carrier to XYZ carrier next year, and you get a claim on that transaction. Well, as long as you had coverage going back, the new carrier is going to handle that claim, not the one that you had when the error occurred. It's kind of confusing. I hate talking about it, but it's reality. Now, if you cancel your policy, if you're retiring, if you're closing, if you're selling the business, then you have an opportunity to buy what's called a tail. And when you buy that tail, you're able to continue to turn claims in that may come in, even though you're not doing business anymore. But if you don't buy the tail and you just quit insuring your office, no, you don't have coverage. And it's not necessarily a 5-year window. It's that you simply don't have coverage. If you continue, regardless of what carrier, you go from one carrier to the next, we hope you don't, but if you go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, without any gaps in coverage, then you're okay. All those transactions that you had should be covered, depending on what carrier you're with when the claim comes in. But the 5-year, Kathy, it's not that you have to keep it for 5 years. Maybe she thought, I don't know. You don't have to keep it for 5 years, but once you cancel your coverage with claims made, there is no coverage. You either buy a tail, and the tail is, I can report for a year, or I can report for 2 years, and you pay a premium for it, or I can report for 3 more years. And maybe in that case, she could report for 5 more years, but yeah, you have to pay for it.
Well,
Um,
Lisa, based on what you said, I always like to point out that if you're switching company to company, a lot of times people do just because the other company's quote is cheaper than what you're currently paying. The point we've made is that no two E&O policies are the same. So let's say you did property management 3 years ago, but you stopped doing property management. You switch to a new company whose policy doesn't provide property management coverage. That's why it's cheaper. But then you have a claim that's reported with that new company based on the property management you've done in the past. You have no coverage. So these are the things that you have to take into consideration when you decide to switch carriers. Is you need to be protected not just for the work that you're going to be doing, but you need to maintain protection for all the work you've done.
yeah. Okay. Kathy, did that answer the question? I hope. Okay. There was another question. What if there are two principal brokers? Do we need policies for each one? No. If it's one firm, and you have two principals, three principals, you don't need more. It's the named insured is typically the name of the firm. So if it's Berkshire Hathaway, Portland, that's the named insured. And anybody, whether they're principal brokers working under that firm, property managers, they should all be covered by that policy. Again, check with your carrier. And then there was a really good question. What if a claim comes in after an agent has left the company? Will they still be defended? Now that depends on the policy that you have. But I will tell you that most of the policies that I've seen will cover that agent, because under their definition of insured, they say we're covering any agents, independent contractors who are currently working for the firm, as well as, assistants and things of that nature. But we're also covering any past employees or independent contractors. The key is, let's say you're an agent in an office and you leave that office and a claim arises for something you did while you were with that office. Yes, it should go back to that office and that broker has to turn it in to their carrier. What if that broker stopped their E&O? Then it goes back to what Chad was talking about.
Yep.
There is no coverage for that claim. But if they continue their coverage and you're no longer with them, but the claim is against you for a transaction that occurred when you were with them, their carrier should handle it. Okay, I think that's all the questions for now. Oregon claims by the numbers. This is interesting because we've seen a little bit of a shift in Oregon, and it's really due to a larger claim that we had, or claims. This information is from the claims department. We've been working with AXA XL since 2003. So all of this information is simply going back to AXA. We had other carriers prior to that. But 31% of the claims since 2003 closed without indemnity payments. Indemnity is damages, settlements, and judgments. So look at, sometimes I'll do a meeting, an office meeting, and somebody says, oh, insurance companies, they settle everything. No, they don't. And this number proves that, because if they did, it would be 100% closing with indemnity payments, with damages. 38% closed with expense payments, and 58%, and I love that number, closed without any payments. The expense payments are the attorneys, court costs, but 58% of them where a claim comes in, demand for money or services, like Chad said, and it's turned into the carrier, and the carrier does something, or maybe it just goes nowhere, but the carrier may get involved and they get rid of it before they even have to hire an attorney. That's a beautiful thing. In 2003, our average indemnity or damage payment was $51,007. Well, so far, we're only looking at January through March, so only a very small snapshot, but it's significantly higher than it typically is. It used to be 23,000, and that's because we settled a larger claim in earlier this year. And it was a $90,000 indemnity or damage payment. So that skewed our number for 2023. Our 2023 expense payment is higher, 18,000, not as significant as the damage, but previously the average attorney fees, $12,000. And we've seen with the market, with inflation, we've seen attorney fees going up. It started a few years ago where attorneys are asking for more on their hourly payments because they have, the same expenses that everybody else has. So that is something that's not surprising right there. Countrywide, like if you look at the entire country, the previous payments were more in line. That current payment, that's a little bit skewed, like I said, from a large loss that we had this year. Top Oregon claims. Chad, is this one mine or yours?
I was gonna just touch base on the first one. I think then you were gonna go take over.
Okay.
But
Oh, yeah. Both.
it just goes back to what I was saying before, that more than 72% of our claims come from failure to disclose material defects. And so it's very important that, sellers fill out that form as well as they can. But the thing too is that you can protect yourself, transfer the liability for these failing to disclose with, home inspections and home warranties, because those home inspections will catch things that the sellers didn't disclose. And then the home warranty will, also pick up on some of the other issues that may arise because it wasn't disclosed. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, water infiltration. This is Oregon. This is countrywide. In fact, anything to do with water. And then, of course, when you have water infiltration, you have mold oftentimes. But leaky roof, water in the basement, even standing water in a backyard, anything to do with water, of that 72% of the misrepresentation claims that Chad mentioned, about a large number of those have to do with something to do with water. We have one defense attorney that used to say there's two types of basements, those that leak and those that haven't leaked yet. And I think you'd all agree with that statement. So water infiltration, a big, big deal. And then breach of contract. If your client says that you breached the contract, whether it's an agency issue or, a failed closing, that is another claim that we see in Oregon as well as countrywide. These are typical countrywide. Yeah.
Yeah, the zoning is always comes into play where, the home buyer may be buying a property and they want to start an in-home daycare, or they're a mechanic and they want to do some moonlighting. And so the neighborhood, they may run into some zoning issues because maybe that particular neighborhood doesn't want at-home businesses, or they don't want their street lined with cars that need to be repaired. So you got to be careful, make sure you understand, what your clients' intentions are, and make them aware of what they can and cannot do in that neighborhood. Wrongful eviction, we talked about earlier, under personal injury. I see quite a few of those. Boundary, square footage, best bet in those situations is just to get it surveyed. That'll eliminate any arguments. Fair housing discrimination. These days, pretty much anybody can cry foul. A lot of protected classes. So we do see a lot of claims reported under that category.
Yeah, Chad, if I can just interject here too, because fair housing, I think a lot of people think of racial fair housing discrimination. And what we see is so much more. It's anything that has to do with a protected class. Keep in mind, if you're doing property management, and this is where I think we see a number of them, where perhaps the property manager is not leasing to someone and they think it's because they have 5 children, or because I'm a single mom, or my familial status. So any relation to protected class, it's not just racial discrimination, that's included, of course, but fair housing just reaches out and encompasses so much more.
Yep. And sewer versus septic always surprises me how this pops up at the top of the list year after year, where somebody buys a home that they think is on the sewer, and it turns out that it's on septic, and you know what can happen if you start using too much water. That septic system ends up backing up, can cause thousands and thousands of dollars in damage. And so yeah, make sure you know for sure, not just because somebody wrote it down on a piece of paper at some point. Make sure you do your due diligence and research, and make sure that the property is either sewer or septic.
Well, okay, so we had hoped to have Lee Santos, who is our claims representative, on the call, and he had a mediation he had to attend, but he did provide us with a couple of Oregon claims just to highlight. These are pretty typical, but this one just shows you the cost of defense. This was a claim where the buyer alleged defects in the property that weren't disclosed prior to closing, and claimed they made a verbal threat of litigation and to take it to social media to give bad reviews on our insured. The insured immediately turned it into the E&O, which was good, as a potential problem, as an incident, as Chad had mentioned earlier. Soon after reporting it, the insured did get that claim demand, the demand for money or services from the buyer, looking for several thousands of dollars for their insured for the role. Our insured was a listing agent on that property. The seller did complete a seller's disclosure statement, and a home inspection was done on the property. And the seller immediately brought that claim to the E&O, and the E&O along with the seller, or excuse me, with our insured, crafted a response claiming that there is no merit to the claim because of, A, B, C, D, E. And they did that. And guess what? It settled out. It settled for $90,000, $42,000 in defense costs instead of the $197,000. But still, even when you think everything's done right, all the boxes are checked, you still have to defend these claims. So there is a high defense cost affiliated with them. Okay. This one is a sewage system. Now this shows the benefits of early mediation. There was a demand there was some issues, there was material defects to the sewage system, and the demand was $400,000. The claim was arbitrated or mediated per the contract. The contract had that clause in it, thank you. And the early mediation saved thousands of dollars in defense costs alone. It is a great strategy to use mediation whenever possible to get things done early on and not get into that situation where there's a lot of defense dollars paid. And certainly one thing that we want to do, or the carrier wants to do, is keep it out of litigation. We don't want to go so far as to go before a court, because then things escalate. And something to keep in mind, when you have claims, whatever is paid out in those claims affects you in different ways. Every year your E&O policy is renewed. They look at how many claims have been paid, and they go back 5 years. And if you have significant dollars paid out and you're not paying significant dollars in, it's kind of a lose-lose for the insurance company. And that's going to affect whether or not you can get coverage, what your premium is, what kind of coverage you can get. things of that nature. So it's in your best interest too, not to have these bills run up very high. So mediation, great tool. Frivolous claims happen, like Chad said, you can sue anybody for anything. This was failure to disclose. You know, I think this is the one I already read. I think I transposed two of them. Yes, this is the one I already talked about. And this one didn't pay. Yeah, I got those two messed up. But the importance of early reporting. Again, let's say that in this situation, the broker reported an incident, said, I think this could get ugly, and then it got ugly, and they reported it, and it still got taken care of. What if they hadn't reported it? What if they didn't report the incident, and then they got the demand, and they just ignored it? And months down the line, the demand grows, and then they turn it into the carrier a year later. With claims made, the carrier is going to say, you should have turned it in when you got the claim. So it's very important. Our claims department doesn't put black check marks next to your name when you call them. We encourage you to talk to whoever you're insured with, the claims department. If you have any questions, should I be turning this in as a claim? Should I not? Very important. Okay, we have a couple of questions before we get into these trends. Oh, does E&O, this one from Mary Kay kind of goes with what I just said. Does my E&O go up if I have a claim? It's going to depend on how much was paid in the claim. And some people have claims and they pay very small amounts. It might not affect the premium. It's really going to depend on the circumstances of the claim. Do you recommend we also carry director and officers insurance? If you are a director or officer for a nonprofit, yeah, that's a great question. My first brokerage closed down in 2016. The managing broker continued to pay E&O insurance. How long after a transaction can a claim be filed? That's a legal question. I'm not going to step outside of my area of expertise because there are different statutes of limitations in every state. And it's going to depend on what the statute of limitations is in Oregon. And I think your legal hotline can answer that. But I know typically it could be 3 to 5 years. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know that that's Oregon. And it can depend on what type of claim it is. Some states have different statutes for contract claims than they do for other claims. But yeah, you would have to check with legal counsel on that. Oh, that's a good one. Talk about that particular large claim. Let me see if I have more on that one.
Wasn't that the $90,000 one that you were just talking about, or is there a different?
Yeah, but I think I transposed a couple of those.
Okay.
That one was okay. Yeah. So forget what I said about that one. This is what I have from Lee, and I'm not intimately involved in the claims, so I wish I had him on. But that was a breach of contract claim and misrepresentation in the sale of property. The attorney claimed that the insured breached his fiduciary duty to his client. Yeah, he didn't give me very much information. I'm sorry, I don't have much on that one. But yeah, that was a biggie. Statute of limitations, we talked about that. Early mediation. Thanks, spell check. Early medication. Is that what I have on there?
Yeah, it's being proactive is, medication, mediation serve the same purpose.
Is it advised that brokerages continue to pay, coverage after a brokerage is closed? No. What you would do then is buy that tail coverage. The tail is going to let you report anything that comes in new for a certain period of time, but it's not there to cover new transactions. So that's the way claims made works. Cyber, yeah, you all have probably heard this till you're ready to say, I don't want to talk about it anymore, but it's not going away. It is, Chad likes to say that one day we'll have a cyber product with E&O as an endorsement to it, because cyber is just becoming so big and ugly, and it changes every day. Scares the bejeebers out of me. And cyber coverage, there's no two policies alike. There's no consistency. Different cyber policies have different definitions. So it's really, really difficult even to compare coverages in cyber, but what we know we need it. Anybody who is working in real estate, certainly as the second most targeted industry, needs it. And it's becoming so much more sophisticated. Remember 10 years ago when you would get a phishing attempt in your email and it would have all kinds of misspelling and you knew it was someone who doesn't even speak English? That's not the case anymore. I get some really slick stuff. I got something from my bank. It looked like it was from my bank. It wasn't, and had their logo and everything. And it said something about a payment on my credit card. And I knew I didn't have a balance on that card. So that was a red flag to me. And what I did was I went to the bank's website. I didn't respond. I didn't do anything with that email. But that's how they're so professional looking. Our company sends out kind of test emails to catch you and see if you're going to click on something. And as much as I teach risk management, I'm a certified risk manager and I teach cyber liability. I've had to go to clicker school twice because I clicked on something I shouldn't have clicked on. It's just an ugly, ugly business. And small businesses, people think, well, hackers aren't going to go after a small business. Yeah, they do, because they know that if they go after a small business, the chances are that they don't have as robust firewalls or protection as a large business. And small businesses, it just can be completely devastating to the point of they have to close their doors after a breach. Real estate agents, why are you major targets? It's obvious. You deal with a lot of non-public, personally identifiable information, and transactions are moving large sums of money. The fastest growing cyber crimes are wire fraud and ransomware. And I do want to throw this in. This is in here because this is CE. Does this mean that E&O covers all this stuff? No, it doesn't. Our E&O policy has some cyber coverage in it where you can, we give a little in the policy and then we have an endorsement you can purchase that gives even more. But is all of this stuff going to be covered? Not necessarily. Even with a standalone cyber policy, you want to talk to your Pearl agent or whoever you're insured with about cyber coverage. But I can tell you that this is an ever-changing landscape, and coverage has been kind of interesting. This I'm not going to go through this this is like 3 or 4 pages of this case study. Basically the case study is what we've all heard forever, and that's where there's an agent who's hacked, and the hacker, when you're hacked, the hacker is going to be in there. You're not going to know they're in there till they're gone. They could be in there for months, and they're going to look at how you do business, how you respond to people, how you craft your emails, and then they're going to see when you have closings coming up. And that's when they're going to send a fraudulent email to your buyer saying change in wire fraud instructions prior to closing. They're going to do it a few days before closing. Again, you've heard all of this. They are going to, if the buyer gets that email and they respond to the email and say, I just want to confirm you changed the closing instruction, that's not going back to you, the agent. That's going back to the hacker, because they've done what you call spoofing of the sender's email. So your name may be Mary Beth Jones at Berkshire Hathaway. And then they'll put Mary, M-A-R-I, Beth Jones. So you wouldn't even necessarily notice the sender's name was changed, and it goes back to the hacker. And the hacker, of course, is going to say, yeah, changing wiring instructions. So that's the deal. And then the buyer, if they send their money off, it's gone. You get to closing, you find out there's no funds. What do you do? Okay, you look at cyber insurance, but I can tell you this scenario, this first party loss of funds is difficult to insure because your email being hacked, you would have to have non-public personally identifiable information that the hacker gets and uses to defraud the buyer. Do you have non-public personally identifiable information in your back and forth emails? You don't have their social security number, their credit card numbers. I question that. So what do? You insure it for as much as you can, and you also start with security. Make it so this claim will never happen. Don't help the fraudsters. Use brokerage email instead of generic email or Gmail or Yahoo, or I even see AOL still out there. When possible, when you're doing business, don't insert yourself in the process of transferring funds. Leave it to the buyer and the title company, between them. Don't insert yourself. Have a current commercial grade antivirus program running and set it to automatically download and install virus updates. This is really important, and I was pretty ignorant to it for a long time, but you can go in and you can purchase antivirus programs. You can get free stuff from McAfee and from these other companies, and then they'll have a little bit better program, but they'll have the commercial grade that costs a little bit more. Spend the money, get the good one, get the commercial grade. And then when you have it, set it so that it's automatically going to update and do patches, because viruses change every day. There's new viruses coming out every day, and these companies are putting together patches for this particular virus. Well, if I have it installed right now and I haven't updated and a new virus came out today, I'm not necessarily going to have protection. What I used to have is where it didn't automatically update, and I would have these little pop-ups on my computer say, there's an update available, and I'd click it and close it because I'm really busy and I don't have time to click on that and say, go ahead and update. Well, that was stupid. Now I just say, you don't even have to ask me, just update the stuff, okay? Just to update it. Password protection, we've all heard that. I visited an interesting website where you can go in and you can play around with passwords. And I just put Lisa in, and it tells you how fast a hacker can break in with that password. And it was just ridiculous. It was immediate. And then I put a phrase with numbers and some characters in there. And it was pretty long. I think it was 12 or 14 characters. And it was 3.5 years. So which one are they going to go after, right? And you need to change your passwords often and not have the same password for all of your accounts. If you have the same password and they crack it and it's on your Bank of America account, but it's on everything else, they're getting into all your accounts. Have different passwords. Easy to say, because I know it's really difficult to remember, but there are apps you can purchase. There are different things that you can do to maintain and to try to remember those, but change them often. If you have to send an attachment and it's something with non-public, personally identifiable information, consider encrypting it. Don't do what someone did with me. They sent me this encrypted message, and in the body of the encrypted message, they put the password to open it. You send it in a separate one, or you tell them over the phone. Don't use public computers for work, or anything that's sensitive, like hotel lobbies, where you can print your boarding pass. Avoid public Wi-Fi. If you're sitting in Panera or Starbucks and you're on their Wi-Fi, you might as well just tell the people that are sitting around you what you're doing, because it's that easy. If you use a VPN or your cell phone hotspot, that's safer. But first and foremost, as this should be number one, is educating your clients from the moment you have that listing appointment, or, you know, you're meeting with a buyer. This is something to talk about, and tell them, if you ever get anything, an email that's talking about the finances on this transaction, pick up the phone, because I don't send those emails, and this is what's going on, and there's a potential to lose money. And if you scare them, then, you know, hopefully they're going to pick up the phone. You say, pick up the phone and call me. Do not respond to that email. And here's the number you're going to call me at. There are some insurance policies that I've seen that you have to do that to have coverage kick in. You have to have some kind of a confirmation call. Here's what NAR put out, this first part. It's a sample email template. And this is talking about exactly what I just said. And you put it at the bottom of your emails. Now, I'm not very good for reading small print at the bottom of emails, but one of our clients, the second one with the stop sign, put this together. One of our clients put it together, and I love it. So I asked if we could use it, and they said, sure. If I saw that at the bottom of an email, I would read it. And again, they said, sure, share it with your clients. That I think is going to catch attention, maybe more than the NAR one. Unimproved. This is something our carrier just this year has told us they're seeing, and it's an emerging trend that's pretty scary. Typically it's unimproved land, but doesn't necessarily have to be unimproved land. And the seller is an absentee seller. And those are the targets where somebody fraudulently comes in and poses as a seller, sells the property, and takes off with the proceeds. And properties without mortgages are of course prime targets, because you don't have the checks and balances in there. The fraudster poses as the owner. They wire, a lot of times it's outside of the country. You're dealing with maybe the seller is outside of the country, or the bank is outside of the country, or both is, and communications are all via email. You have to take precautions and fully document the actions taken. And this is an example of vacant land, German owner, South African notary. And proceeds to a bank in New York. Why would you do that? Here's a claim example from Lee Santos that this happened in Oregon. Actually didn't become a claim, but this was an incident notice from an insured, a buyer's agent, who was advised that a fraudulent seller claiming to be the owner seller of a lot in a rural area was attempting to sell the lot, pretending to be the owner of the property. The sale was to be completed online, an all-cash deal with no face-to-face meeting. Our insured, the agent, was suspicious and spoke to the neighbor, perfect, about the landowner who actually knew the rightful property owner of the lot. Okay, this red flag, the agent saw a red flag, acted on it, perfect. It was discovered that the land was not for sale and never was. So the sale didn't happen. The authorities were notified. This is something that's happening countrywide, and thank goodness for that agent for taking going a step further and keeping that from turning into a really bad situation. These are some red flags I already mentioned, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through too many, but you're getting this PowerPoint. But you can ask for ID, you can have calls with, have this type of call, FaceTime calls with the seller and compare it to the ID. There's various things that you can do. The ADA compliant websites, this came up, we had provided some educational information to OAR years ago and thought that maybe this was going away, but it's not. We're still seeing it. We see it move through different states. So I wanted to bring it up. Accessibility, the American with Disabilities Act of 1990 doesn't just refer to physical spaces. It refers to it's a protection for those who are visually impaired. And so your website has to be accessible to people who are visually impaired or legally blind. And something that I wouldn't even have thought of, but even though they have these terminals where they can go, and if someone is impaired, they can go and have the terminal read them the text, they may not be able to interpret a picture, or the size of the font may not be right, or the contrast. There are a lot of things to think about in making these websites compliant. This goes back to 2019, so it's pretty old, but that's when one particular law firm started suing a lot of realtors, or not suing them. They started sending demand letters. NAR got involved. That was in Florida. And it was NAR had crafted a beautiful response. Then it moved to, I think, Massachusetts, and we've had issues come up, and our claims department has handled these, and then Pennsylvania. So I still bring it up because I want to say that if you, let me see. If you do get one of the letters, what the law firm is saying is they send a letter out and they say, your website isn't compliant. We want to have a call with you. And they do make a demand. At that time, they were demanding a few $1,000s. But if you agree to that phone interview, you could harm your defense in that complaint. So what you want to do, if you got one of these letters about website compliance, contact your broker, who's going to contact the E&O, notify NAR and the Oregon Association, and not the Michigan Association of Realtors, the Oregon Association. And then have your IT expert look at whoever designed your website, double check it, make sure that it's accessible. Like closed captioning, text, cursor size, font, contract ratios, all these things have to be set just so that someone who's impaired can view it. Okay, let's do a couple more questions. There's some funny ones here.
The next question was what's the number one targeted industry for malware? You said real estate's number two. Who's number one?
Healthcare. What's the first one? Okay. We have a disclaimer in our email signatures that says we'll never ask to wire funds or send wire instructions. Does that help legally protect us? We're going to talk about it in our pearls of wisdom, but I consider that documentation. Does it help? Yes. Does it completely remove you from it? No. But we like documentation, and we like things that are disclaimers. So yes, it does help. And hopefully the person receiving the email is reading those. That's why I like that stop sign one. Password conundrum. How much of this fraudulent land listing can be laid at the door of the escrow title rather than the real estate broker? That's a good question. That's a really good question.
It also goes back to, this may be a percentage of liability scenario, because that falls back into cyber, because not usually cyber doesn't necessarily 100% fall on the realtor. If it goes to court, the judge may say you're 40% at fault, your client's this percentage at fault, the title company's this percentage at fault. So it's very possible in that question that the scenario may be broken down into percentages of who's actually liable.
Possibly. And again, this is a 2023 update from our claims department, so we don't have a ton of information on it yet. I'm going to post that one, and then let me copy that one. And can I talk? Yeah. Kathy, do you have your hand up? Let me see if I can get additional information, and I'll share it with Erica and Katie, and perhaps they can get it to everybody who was on this call. But thank you, Christina. That's a really good question. Kathy, did you want?
Somebody needs to unmute her.
Yeah, I don't see her hand up. Katie, can you unmute Kathy?
Okay.
Thank you. Kathy?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes,
we can.
Okay. I've been a real estate agent for 35 years. And I want to say that one thing that a realtor has to be concerned about is sometimes your broker is not the ultimate authority. And I had to spend 3 hours at the federal courthouse researching court documents because I got a tip that a country property I sold had been a meth lab from another realtor who lived down the road. And so I said, no, I would never sell a meth lab. Well, it turns out I had, but because I called my buyer at 9 o'clock in the morning after literally staying up all night worrying, I ignored my broker's advice. Well, this is all hearsay, Kathy. You don't have to worry about it. I defied my broker and I called the buyer of the property. Turns out her father had died of a meth overdose. And so she did not report me in the lawsuit, although the other company that was involved was reported in my company. She completely left my name out of it. So sometimes you have to do your due diligence without your broker really being a completely, person with integrity. And another thing I want to say is that if you have a habit of working with integrity through your career, which I have had, I've never had any legal hassles in 35 years. Other brokers will defend you. Specifically, a title company told me, the escrow officer, that I should use a 0.89 acre instead of a 0.55 acre on a listing. And so I used the higher number. Well, it turns out that the buyer found out from the county it was actually the lower number and they wanted to sue me. But the broker at the other company had worked with me at my former company. And he said, oh, Kathy would never do anything like that. And so the person believed him that I had integrity. So all I'm saying is, you want to do everything impeccably as possible. And then when you get in possible trouble, you won't have to pay for it.
Kathy, that's a great, that's a great point. Yeah. Use integrity. I love it. Thank you for sharing those. Okay. Christina added, Oregon Real Estate Agency clarified in the last couple of years that including hold harmless clauses in real estate contracts is not allowed. Yet I still see it a lot. Do they hold any water in actual claims? Again, documentation, they could completely remove you. No. But we all want to see them in there, I guess. All right, let's, we have about 15 minutes, I think. And we have our pearls of wisdom. So we're going to wrap up all this ugly stuff we talked about with, there's some really easy things you can do to shift the risk, to minimize your exposure. First of all, recommend experts. Don't step outside of your area of expertise. I know years ago, you wanted to do everything for your client and step outside of real estate professional services. As soon as you do that, you're bringing liability upon yourself. So you want to recommend, you have somebody asking you about taxes or a legal question, or even interpreting condo docs, have them go to an attorney. You don't want to try to put on the hat that is not your professional expertise, because that's gonna hurt you. This is where you're shifting risk. You're shifting risk to another professional. And as Chad mentioned earlier, we're looking at 72% of our claims come from something wrong with the property, condition of property. Well, what do? You recommend home warranties. They're not going to pick every condition up. but perhaps they would pick up that particular condition of property issue so it doesn't turn into a claim. We really recommend it, shifting risk to a home warranty. And home inspections, the same thing, shift the risk to them. Hopefully, the home inspector will identify an issue and it won't turn into a claim. You're going to hopefully provide a list of home inspectors. Don't choose that home inspector because that can be dicey. If the home inspector does something wrong, they can come after you for a fraudulent referral. And you know, sometimes we even see a home inspection done and something's identified and the buyer sees it and they still try to sue. It's almost like they planned that. That's where the E&O comes in. You still have to defend yourself, but shift the risk when you can. The sellers, go ahead, Chad.
I was just gonna say that this is very important stuff. Don't gloss over this. A lot of brokerages have over the last couple of years during COVID when the market, you know, everybody was battling to make a sale. And a lot of people were closing deals without home inspections, you know, without, you know, sight unseen, you know, cash deals. I mean, it was just give me the house. I don't care. I don't want to care about all that other stuff. You know, you're leaving yourself vulnerable for assuming all that risk just to make a sale. So that's why we're pointing all this out. It's very important to keep in mind.
And again, that's where the seller's disclosure form is very important, or a waiver. If a home inspection is done on a property and it identifies something the seller didn't disclose and they didn't know about it, maybe, and the deal falls through, do you have that disclosure form? Do you have the seller, now that they know about it, do they update the disclosure form? It's a good idea. As long as I've had some brokers say, well, I don't think the inspection was right. Well, that's a different issue. But if the seller becomes aware of something, it's better to disclose. I sold my house 20 years ago, and that I had been in a very long time. And after working at this job, when I completed my seller's disclosure statement, I had addendums on it. It was like a book. I disclosed everything. And it really protected me because I had a basement with those little rod holes and I had them repaired and I had a warranty on it. And I disclosed all of that. And about a year after I moved out of the home, the buyer called me and said, yeah, those things are leaking. And I said, well, look at the disclosure statement. I disclosed it. I gave you the name of the company, have at it. And I never heard back because I disclosed everything. Avoid claims. One of the questions in the chat was about and I don't know in general if it, the question was, do these things happen in small communities or the big cities? And I'm assuming you're talking about claims in general. Well, it depends. It depends if it's a high-risk client, high-risk transaction. I can tell you that the more costly the property is, potentially the larger the claim could be or the uglier the claim could be. And in Oregon, you have some beautiful, beautiful coastal properties with high value homes, and you're dealing with water and all kinds of lovely issues. Those are higher risk transactions because they're high value. First of all, high risk clients. Who do you think is a high risk client? First time buyers who expect everything. They've never done this before and they think you're going to do everything for them. Attorneys. If I'm doing this in person, that's usually people who raise their hand and they say attorneys. Yeah, they have the wherewithal. They are people who have enough money to make something drag on forever. Those are high risk clients. High risk transactions, again, high value homes, commercial transactions. You're probably going to go through with those transactions and make a commission, but there is a high risk transaction that I would implore you to walk away from. And that's if you find yourself working with someone who's discriminatory. It's not worth it. That is a high risk transaction you want to walk away from. And then, Chad, you probably want to add to both of those, but I know you want to talk about office policies and procedures.
Yes, you know, as a former United States Marine, I'm all about following orders, and I believe that following policies and procedures is paramount. Your broker owner has spent a lot of time building the business and how they want business to be conducted, and you're an extension of them. And it is very, very important that you follow exactly the procedures and the policies that they've outlined, and how, because when we get into claim situation, especially in a courtroom situation, the plaintiff's counsel, one of the first things that they're going to point out is showing that, hey, this agent wasn't even following their own company's policies and procedures. What else are they not doing? It makes it very hard for an insurance company to defend if you're not following the policies and procedures. One of the recommendations I've always made to broker owners is that they create a checklist, and that everybody has to go through every one of those items, and no one gets a commission check until that checklist is completed. That's going to make sure that everybody is doing exactly what they need to be doing to prevent potential claims.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I love this slide, don't overstate. And the quote there from Terry Watson, I really like, be the source to the source, but not the source. So you're going to have clients who ask you, and I think in the chat we had that, clients who ask you all these questions, and someone said they trust me. They say, I trust you, I want your advice. Well, that doesn't mean you have to give them all the answers. If you give them information that you got from somewhere else, you give it to them and you tell them where you got it from. So you're not the source, but you're telling them who the source is. But what if they ask you something that they can get from a township office, and you say, you know what, you can get that information right over here. You're pointing them to the source. I've had agents say to me, but I'm supposed to do that. Well, no, you're still providing a service. You're just telling them where they can get information. What if they ask you what a neighborhood is like? Are there a lot of kids in that neighborhood? Drive through the neighborhood. Drive through at different times of day. You're not telling them, you're not answering that question, but you're suggesting this is how you can find out on your own. Talk to the neighbors. And some people cringe when I say that. But if they buy the house and they get in, they're going to talk to the neighbors. So they might as well do it now, get it over with. Be the source to the source, but not the source. And provide facts, just facts. And again, this is where I got the information from. Don't overstate. When our claim department gets claims and they read these complaints, and sometimes they just like their hair curls because they'll see phrases like completely remodeled. What does that mean? My agent told me the kitchen was completely remodeled. The house was completely remodeled. How about being more specific? Instead of saying new roof, okay, new roof in 2019, be specific, not glossing over. We've seen crazy claims, like we had one, this was in Florida, where the complaint was between the buyer and seller initially, because it was represented that the countertops in the kitchen were Corian, but they were something else. They weren't Corian. And the value of what they were was, you're looking at a few $100s difference. A few $100s. Yet by the time these people start going after each other, and then they come after the agent, they have an attorney. And all of a sudden, this is way more than a few $100s. Hardwood floors. Are they really hardwood? Are they laminate? it's just like Kleenex. Kleenex is a brand name, right? Tissue. So you want to be sure if you're saying this is a safe neighborhood. It might be safe today, but when the buyer gets in and something happens a few days later in that neighborhood, not safe anymore, and they can come after you. Quiet neighborhood. These are all phrases that can be very dangerous. So you don't want to overstate. You want to just the facts, just the facts. Do you have anything, Chad, on this one?
No, I just, personal experience, you're talking about buying a house. I wish I had drove around the neighborhood when I bought this house, because my next door neighbor is a amateur DJ. So I occasionally get loud music coming from his garage. I got kids down at the end of the street that are in the band. That turns out the high school, which is like 6 blocks away, the band is practicing. I can hear them. Then the other side of the farm, there's a big park where they hold concerts, and I got that music. I'm like, I like music, but I want to listen to the music that's in my house, not everybody else's music.
Yeah, if you would have driven through.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to put that on my seller's disclosure when I sell the house, and let them know that you're gonna get entertained if you live here.
Okay, so this is our last slide, and this is the creme de la creme. This is the most important thing. If you forget everything else Chad and I talked about, if you remember this, it's good. This is the most important. Document, document, document. Your documentation can be your best defense. It's not necessarily the person with the best attorney or the most money or who's right or wrong, who's going to win in a dispute. It can be the person with the most paper, right? And I know you got a lot of paper you're dealing with already in these transactions. We're talking about a little bit more than the transaction file. We're talking about any correspondence that you have with regard to a transaction. If you have a claim, one of the first things the carrier is going to do is say to you, okay, we need a chronology of events. Let's say it's been 3 years since that transaction occurred. Are you going to be able to put all that together? Do you remember everything if you haven't documented your file? I know I can't remember what I had for dinner last Friday. So there's no way. Document, document, document. And we're talking about emails. If you get an email from somebody with questions, you respond to it, or you have a phone conversation with your client and you send them an email and you say, I just want to confirm this is what we just talked about, print that, put it in the file or save it. And what if they respond and say, yes, that's even better. Save that, Post-it notes, voice messages that are pertinent to the transaction, text. Keep that information within that file, and the most robust files should be kept in your broker's office. Because someone asks, what if I leave the firm? Well, you don't want the best, most documented file to be somewhere, gone. It needs to be in the broker's office. And don't destroy anything unless you're under your broker's policies and procedures. It says that it's time to destroy documents. Chad, I know you want to add to this one.
Well, I just saw a question here. It says, do you happen to recommend any program that is good for downloading text messages for your files? And, I don't, because there's so many. You just have to find one that's going to work best with, for you and your device. A lot of people have Apple, other people have, Android. I imagine if we polled all the folks, it might be one or two could still have a flip phone up there. I don't know. But, the text message, keeping that information in the file is absolutely paramount. You have to do it. And the reason for that is, like Lisa said, is that, if the agent leaves the firm, we need the most complete file, and we may not be able to track down that agent to get those text messages, or that agent may have switched phones and lost all the text messages. So make sure you're getting everything you can into that file, because just like Lisa said, that if we have the most paper, we may very well win.
Yeah, consider it's going to be your word against the your client or whoever's suing you, their word. And the courts are going to lean towards the consumer because they're holding you to a higher standard as a real estate professional. So if your client says they never recommended that I get a home inspection, but you pull that document out that says, well, yeah, I did, and you signed it, that could remove you from a case during discovery when that document is reviewed and you're out. So that's your defense. We have some really good stuff in the text, or in the chat. So if you have questions about, Deb shared, I think it's a text app, iMazing for Apple. Had another question about the statute of limitations. You have to check with legal in Oregon, your association's legal counsel, because I don't know what that is. It's different in every state. And then someone said for Android, you can use Texture and export a TXT file. Mighty Text is great for Android. Oh, that's good too. Very easy to select and print text messages. All as one file at the end of the transaction.
It's good to see that there are people that are using that, because a lot of times we run into that they haven't been. So this is good to see.
This is really good information. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. We get so much information we're able to use in future meetings when we do these, and we appreciate all of your feedback and questions.
Even earlier in the feed, they were asking about, recommending somebody, and it's like we were talking about earlier, transferring your risk. It's always best to recommend, multiple people, so that if they do pick one person, if you just recommend one person and they're not happy with that person, they're going to blame you. So by giving them multiple references is also transferring your risk. And it's the same thing, like, somebody's asking, what do you think is the best text message service? There's so many. It's hard for me to even say one or two or three, but it's good here that your fellow folks here have given some really good tips. So I'm actually, a couple of them I haven't seen before, so that the list grows. I'm gonna have to look into them.
Yeah. Well, our time is up, and we made it. We made it through, and we made it through the presentation. We thank you all. We will have, I did send the PowerPoint to Erica, so like I said, she'll be able to share that. And if anyone has any questions, I didn't put our phone numbers up here, but we can be reached at Pearl Insurance. You can reach me at lisa.scoble@pearlinsurance.com and Chad at chad.wenzelsprat@pearlinsurance.com. And hope you guys all have a great evening. Thank you.